The year was 1976. America was celebrating 200 years of independence. Fireworks exploded across the country. Families packed movie theaters to watch Rocky for the very first time. Music blasted from car radios. It was supposed to be a summer people would remember with pride. But in a quiet neighborhood in Winter Garden, a 13-year-old girl was about to become the victim of a nightmare so horrifying that nearly 50 years later, people still cannot forget it. And what makes this case even darker, the killer was allegedly sleeping under the same roof. Because what investigators discovered that morning was not just murder, it was betrayal inside a family home. At the center of this case was a 20-year-old man named James Ernest Hitchcock. Before moving to Florida, Hitchcock had already been in trouble with the law in Arkansas for burglary. He served prison time and was eventually released on parole. Trying to rebuild his life, he relocated to Winter Garden, where he worked odd jobs with his brothers, fixing cars at a service station and picking fruit in nearby fields. But in 1976, Hitchcock suddenly became sick and stopped working. No income, no future, no place to stay. So his brother Richard allowed him to move into the family home. Inside that home lived Richard's wife and her 2 daughters from a previous relationship. One of them was 13-year-old Cynthia Anne Driggers. Everyone called her Cindy. And according to later testimony from her younger sister, Hitchcock's behavior around the girls quickly became disturbing. Years later, the younger sister would testify that Hitchcock had made inappropriate advances toward her when she was only 12 years old. But nobody realized yet how dangerous he allegedly was. What happened next unfolded in less than 3 hours and would destroy an entire family forever. On the night of July 30th, the family spent the evening together watching television before heading to bed. Everything seemed normal, but around 11 p.m., Hitchcock left the house. For hours, he wandered around Winter Garden drinking beer and smoking marijuana with friends. By the time he returned home, it was nearly 2:30 inches the morning. Saturday, July 31st, 1976. The house was dark. Everyone was asleep, and Hitchcock didn't have a key. Instead of knocking, he climbed through a dining room window. Imagine that moment for a second. A silent house. A man crawling through the window in the middle of the night. And upstairs, a 13-year-old girl sleeping in her bed completely unaware of what was coming. According to Hitchcock's own confession, he quietly entered Cindy's bedroom and wrapped his hands over her mouth. Then he assaulted her, and he made sure it was painful. Later, he would try claiming the encounter was consensual, but investigators and later jurors were disgusted by that explanation. Because Cindy was only 13 years old, but what happened after the assault is what turned this case into pure horror. According to Hitchcock's statement, Cindy told him she was hurt. Then she said she was going to tell her mother. That sentence changed everything. The moment Cindy tried to get out of bed, Hitchcock stopped her. She started yelling. He covered her mouth, then carried her outside the house into the darkness. But once outside, Cindy screamed again, and that is when the violence escalated. Hitchcock struck her in the head, twice. Still unable to silence her, he wrapped his hands around the 13-year-old girl's neck and squeezed until she stopped moving, until the screaming stopped, until the silence returned. What he did afterward shocked investigators even more. Instead of running, instead of panicking, he calmly hid Cindy's body in thick bushes near the home. Then he walked back inside, took a shower, washed his clothes, and went to bed. So heartless, under the same roof as the grieving family who still had no idea their daughter was dead outside. That same morning, Cindy's body was discovered partially clothed in dense vegetation near the property. The entire community was horrified. A young girl murdered near her own home. And almost immediately, suspicion fell on the man who had recently moved into the house, James Hitchcock. Investigators questioned everyone connected to the family. At first, Hitchcock denied involvement, but pressure began building quickly. Authorities learned he had already violated parole conditions connected to Arkansas. Then, suddenly, he broke and confessed. He admitted to assaulting Cindy, admitted carrying her outside, admitted strangling her after panicking when she threatened to tell her mother. He gave investigators details only the killer could know. The case seemed over, open and shut. But then came the trial, and suddenly, Hitchcock changed everything. Because now, according to him, the real killer was his own brother. At trial, Hitchcock abandoned his confession completely. He claimed Richard Hitchcock had actually allowed him into Cindy's bedroom. Then, according to this new version of events, Richard himself later dragged the girl outside and strangled her. Hitchcock insisted he only helped hide the body afterward. And the confession? He claimed he lied to protect his brother. But prosecutors attacked the story relentlessly. Jurors listened carefully, and in the end, they didn't believe him. James Hitchcock was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Most people assumed the case was over. They were wrong. Because this would become one of the longest-running death row cases in Florida history. Decades passed. Presidents changed. Entire generations grew up. But James Hitchcock remained on death row. Appeal after appeal delayed the execution. At times, his death sentence was overturned, then reinstated. Again and again. 4 separate death sentences across nearly 50 years. Meanwhile, Cindy's family was forced to relive the nightmare over and over in courtrooms. Each new hearing reopening old wounds. Each appeal bringing back memories of that terrifying summer night in 1976. And tensions inside the courtroom sometimes exploded. At one resentencing hearing, family members reportedly erupted in anger after Hitchcock's relatives defended him publicly. Even after decades, the pain was still fresh, because for Cindy's loved ones, time never healed what happened. Now imagine spending almost your entire adult life waiting for execution. That is exactly what happened to James Hitchcock. The young man who entered prison at 20 years old eventually became an old man on death row, gray-haired, wrinkled, still insisting versions of his innocence after decades behind bars. But no appeal erased the confession, no appeal erased the evidence, and no appeal brought Cindy back. Now, nearly half a century after the murder of 13-year-old Cynthia Anne Driggers, the state of Florida is preparing to finally carry out Hitchcock's execution. A case that began during America's bicentennial year may finally reach its ending almost 50 years later. But there is one detail people still cannot get over. Cindy trusted the people inside that home. She went to sleep believing she was safe. Instead, the danger was already inside the house, waiting for everyone else to fall asleep. Hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification for more cases.